100,000 years ago, there were at least 6 different human species on the planet. Now there's only one. Us. These are some of our long-lost relatives. Except for a small amount of inbreeding, we wiped them out. It's fascinating because Neanderthals were not only bigger than us, their brains were larger as well. Individually, they'd physically overwhelm us and likely outthink us too. Fossil records suggest as we left Africa and first encountered the European Neanderthal, we were beaten and retreated. 30,000 years later, we returned to face the Neanderthal again. Something had happened in that time. We'd developed an evolutionary trait. What was it? What allowed us to succeed in the battle for dominance and conquer the world?
To answer that question, we set up a hidden camera experiment to see if this woman would stand up at the sound of this tone, simply because everyone else is. You might be thinking you'd never go along with this. Or would you? After just 3 beeps, and without knowing why she's doing it, this woman is now conforming perfectly to the group. But what happens if we take the group away?
Elaine, please.
Okay, now she's alone. The crowd is gone and nobody is watching her, except our hidden cameras. What do you think she'll do? She's now conforming to the rules of the group without them even being there. Now, watch what happens when we introduce another outsider who doesn't know the rules.
For a noon appointment. Have a seat and they'll be out in just a couple minutes. Great, thanks so much.
Everybody was doing it, so I thought I was supposed to.
Think she'll teach the new guy what to do? We kept the cameras rolling as more unsuspecting patients arrived. And slowly but surely, what began as a random rule for this woman has now become the social norm for everyone in this waiting room. Here to explain what's going on in their brains is Jonah Berger of the University of Pennsylvania.
This sort of internalized form of herd behavior is part of what we call social learning. Starting at a very early age, when we see members of our group perform a task, our brains literally reward us for following in their footsteps.
When I saw everybody stand up, I felt like I needed to join them. Otherwise, I'm like excluded. Once I decided to go with it, then I felt much more comfortable.
Conformity is how we become socialized, but it can also cause us to develop bad habits or repeat past wrongs.
And it's why even this rebel, who wasn't standing for any of this nonsense, eventually joined the ranks. And the only thing more shocking than seeing how easily conformity affects the way you act is that similar forces are subconsciously shaping the way you think right now.
This amazing propensity for social mimicry leads to copying, cults, cultures, religions. It allows us to come together in much greater numbers. It allowed us to overwhelm the Neanderthal and ultimately dominate the planet. Yet this propensity to mimic and follow can be our downfall too. Also, please don't mistake this social mimicry as an indication that we're cleverer than other primates. Take a look at this.
There's an assumption among many of us that the brain of a human can outperform anything that a close relative like a chimpanzee can do. But that's been overturned by this remarkable study that adds to a lot of research that brings chimpanzees closer to humans than would have been thought 10 or 15 years ago. Here's a chimpanzee being taught how to count. It's all the brainchild of Tetsuro Matsuzawa at Kyoto University. Now here's the same task, but it's slightly trickier because they're going to cover up the numbers very quickly and ask the chimpanzee to remember the right sequence. Now this is actually the offspring of I, who several years ago was the first chimpanzee who learned how to use Arabic numerals and really pioneered this remarkable effort by Prof. Matsuzawa on chimp cognition. Now it's the turn of a human guinea pig, a university student. They've only got 5 numbers to get the right sequence after they've been covered up. They start off pretty well and then not very good, and oh dear, can't remember that. And of course when they get it wrong, the test ends and is repeated all over again, and really not a very impressive performance. Now it's back to the chimps doing the same task, and they're incredibly good. In fact, it kind of makes your jaw drop just seeing them in action here. And this is because they've got remarkably good working memory compared with human beings. So, in the battle between university students and young chimpanzees, chimps won, humans nil.
It's eye-opening. If I were to ask you as well how you might improve your ability to perform this task, you might tell me about the benefits of practice, relentless practice. That's how we've been conditioned, all the way through school, university and beyond. Keep practicing, honing our skills. Yet if we carried on making the task harder, perhaps including more numbers, covering them up more quickly, we may expect to see an increasing failure rate. Over time, we might expect to see an increasing failure rate just like this. Except this is actually the annual adverse event rate in the UK. This phenomenon repeats across the world. Australia, the United States. Every day, our workplaces increase in complexity with new drugs, new equipment, and a constantly renewing workforce. The greater the complexity, the greater the risk of error. If the interventions we put in place to deal with these errors only further add to more complexity, more policies, more alerts, more forms to fill in, then we design our hospitals to increasingly fail. In 2016, the British Medical Journal reported medical error as the 3rd greatest cause of death. Let's just stop for a minute. Think back to the chimpanzee video and think that as well as training people to be as good as they can be, why don't we also make the task easier? Imagine how much more successful we'd all be if the numbers remain uncovered. Why didn't we suggest this earlier? Make it easier to perform the task. This is what ergonomics is about. It's about designing our environments, of which we humans are an inextricable part, in order to make it easier to succeed. However, making success easier doesn't appear to be well supported in healthcare culture. Why? It was an experience with Shigamedex that drove me to a deeper understanding of the problem with healthcare. For it's only through understanding something that we can truly fix it. Shigamedex makes success easier. The combination of high-dose rocuronium and Shigamedex provides the ability to rapidly paralyze at an equivalent onset time to suxamethonium. The ability to paralyze for as long as required, providing optimal conditions for surgery, and the ability to rapidly and reliably reverse paralysis at any stage. Shigamedex provides the confidence to give larger doses of rocuronium, making mass ventilation and intubation easier more quickly. Yet in a culture which doesn't support things being easier, Shigamedex can be vehemently resisted. It takes away a competitive edge. In fact, I've heard some anaesthetists claim that using it is cheating. At one of my hospitals, we used to have Sugammadex readily available on our anaesthetic trolleys. Then one day, the head of department decided it should be locked away in recovery. I went through all the appropriate channels to get it back where it was needed. A lot of obstacles were put in the way. Cost. Innovations often cost more to introduce at the front end. Extensive cost-benefit analyses in healthcare, almost impossible to perform. Show me the evidence. Another great barrier to positive change. Supplied with all the evidence, a cost-benefit analysis, deep discussions, manoeuvring. Eventually, it was voted back in through the executive committee. However, in response, the departmental head, who was against its return, resigned his position. In order to coax him back, Sugammadex was kept locked away. It still is. Then I was called into a room with the medical director, and for an hour was threatened and bullied. At one stage, the director pointed at me and said, "I don't care who you are or what you do, but if you ever do anything like this again, you are out." It was then that I realized we don't stand a chance. We'd be picked off one by one in an industry which is too ashamed to change. And all the time, patients will suffer through lack of access to optimal care. I realized then that if healthcare is to improve, we need to work differently. So what's going on? Humans don't resist change. If I was to offer you a lottery win of millions of dollars, you'd most likely accept it. What we resist is a positive loss. Loss of importance of a skill set. The years honing the ability to time reversal with neostigmine. Loss of authority through accepting suggestions for improvement from lower in the hierarchy. And negative gain. In accepting we've resisted an initiative, we need to accept we've put lives at unnecessary risk while waiting. And shame. This shame of change tends to impact most on those in positions of influence. Shame. Shame has been described as a fate worse than death. One reason for the removal of this medieval form of punishment was that while it seemed fairly benign to be put in stocks, the shame associated with it was so profound, some people committed suicide afterwards because they'd been disowned by friends and family and lost their jobs. Those in positions of greatest influence may fear the shame of change the most. They may dig their heels in even further. It's interesting to see how this can then affect the dynamic of whole departments, hospitals, a whole industry, healthcare. Well, this is David. David is an intelligent individual. He may even be the head of his department. The circle represents all of David's knowledge about an issue. The rectangle represents all the possible knowledge and thinking about it. This is David's department. They've all followed a similar career path, topped exams through school, competed all the way, been conditioned through medical school and through their specialty training. They all think in a similar way, and without realizing, without accepting it, they can miss the bigger picture. This is the ideal pattern of thinking of an intelligent team. Diverse thinking, a wealth of ideas spread across the individuals within the group. Unfortunately, because of our dominance hierarchies, we often end up with a team which parrots the most authoritative figure. To do otherwise within healthcare can put one's own career and livelihood at risk. Well, I'd found this out the hard way. For healthcare to improve, we need to understand ourselves better, understand the human in the room, accept our limitations. We need to design our environments, the systems we work in, to get the best out of us. We need to acknowledge our herd mentality and design not only our physical environments, but also our governance structures to accommodate for this. We need to transition from our dominance hierarchies and adopt alongside them teams of networked teams, encouraging diverse thinking and ideas to be shared. Given the right conditions, we'll thrive, and we'll thrive in the right way. Through working together, we can create the best environment for patient care.